Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and I'm going to tell you, this one will get me into trouble. I guarantee it. I have spoken about the millennial reign several times and the possibility that we are living in the short season, and I have gone back and forth on the situation. More and more recently, though, as I've been praying about it and as I've really been studying God's Word, I have realized that a lot of what I have been reading in the Bible, I have been reading things into the text that I have been taught at church. And sometimes it doesn't seem to mesh what is actually being written or what is being told in the Bible. So today I'm actually going to share with you an email that I recently received that kind of verified the misgivings that I've been having. So this email says, Shelly, recently I came upon your YouTube channel, Question the Narrative. Have really enjoyed listening to you as you convey your thoughts on a myriad of subjects. I recently listened to the video titled The Mother of All Rabbit Holes, which conveyed the idea of biblical prophecy already taken place. A little background on myself. I have been in the ministry for over 30 years and a Christian pastor for over 20 years. I have studied what is termed biblical eschatology, last things, for most of my ministry, especially what is commonly called the Olivet Discourse, recorded in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, and also the book of Revelation. If you are familiar with the various viewpoints of New Testament eschatology, it is generally, for better or worse, founded upon the few scriptures of Revelation 20:1-6 and the 1,000-year millennium. So you have dispensational premillennialism, amillennialism, or some will call it amillennialism, postmillennialism, historical premillennialism. This simply defines the time of Christ's coming. Pre, before his establishment of the kingdom. A, no actual 1,000-year period, but more of a general timeline of Christ's rule after his death. Post, Christ will only come after his kingdom is prepared. Personally, my conclusion is that way too much emphasis has been placed on this small use of millennium, where it is virtually not mentioned through the vast majority of prophetic scripture. Having said that, there are also a few other variations of prophecy viewpoints broken up into 4 points: idealism, historicism, futurism, and preterism. I won't go into detail how each of these break down the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but suffice it to say that I subscribe to the futurist viewpoint for most of my life, including the ministry. That is until I began a deep dive looking at Bible prophecy from what I call the 360-degree viewpoint. Each doctrine idea is to be viewed from every conceivable angle, not just pros and cons. After doing this for a few years, I came away with concluding that preterism, past fulfillment, actually made much more sense when taking the scriptures in the context of the timeline in which they were supposedly written, which was the 1st century. This was quite a shift for me, seeing that it concluded that many of the things I was looking forward to and told all my life I would see had already happened. But it also gave me a new appreciation of God's plan and purpose, and this is the formula that I used from a gentleman who claimed to be a preterist as a primer when teaching New Testament Bible prophecy. When reading the New Testament, just pretend that you're reading an actual true story, and that when the text clearly describes that someone is standing there looking someone in the eyes, talking directly to them, just pretend that they were actually talking to the actual person or people the verse actually records that they were actually talking to, especially if they keep using the word you while looking at them and talking directly to them. Then simply pretend that whatever they were being told was actually relevant to the actual person that it was actually being told to. No 7-night end time seminar about 10-headed dragons or descending cities needed. It is a true story that was to and for and about the actual people it says it was to and for and about. But could it be that simple? I believe it is. And I also believe that our hearts have always known it. So let's actually stop right here and we will go to the passages that he is referring to, that he studied the Olivet Discourse. And we are going to apply this to some of the things in those. I'm not going to read all of them in their entirety, but I just want to give you a gist of what he is referring to. Okay, we will start with Luke 21 and we'll start with verse 5. And while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, as for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said, See that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. Then he said to them, Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you, keep in mind who he's speaking to, will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Settle it, therefore, in your minds, not to meditate beforehand how to answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up, even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and some of you they will put to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. Let's go down to, down to verse 25. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations in perplexity, because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. So, growing up in church, we've always been taught that Jesus was speaking to those of us, possibly even now, people in the future. But if you would be reading this, say, as just maybe a fiction book that you picked up at the library, and if you saw one character looking into the eyes of another character and saying things, repeatedly saying, you, your, you wouldn't think that they were talking about anyone but the specific person that they're talking to. Yet that's what we have been taught, is that they weren't actually talking to the people that he seems, I should say, Jesus wasn't actually talking to the people that he certainly seems to be talking to. And that's where the discrepancy has been coming into play. Okay, now we are in Matthew 24, and I'm going to start at verse 3. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered them, saying, See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. I'm going to stop right there. So as you can see, if you are actually trying to read it, not with preconceived notions, many of those preconceived notions that we are brought up with in the church, but if we actually read it for what it says, it certainly does seem that Jesus was speaking directly to the people who were there physically with him at that time. Okay, now I'm going to continue on. To this day, I am now very slow to embrace any particular idea or doctrine, but I definitely believe we should question everything. I don't claim to be a preterist, but I do believe that it is the simplest and most contextual interpretation of New Testament biblical eschatology, especially the Olivet Discourse and the book of Revelation. And I wanted to add that I actually looked up preterism, and R.C. Sproul is actually a partial preterist, which I found to be very interesting. I will conclude by saying that I believe many evangelical Christians have been convinced of future fulfillment for multiple reasons, but one especially sticks out to me. We all want to be relevant, and there is nothing that we want to be more relevant than the story of Christ's second coming, kingdom, etc. Unfortunately, this relevancy is read into the scriptures, changing them to fit our preconceived ideas and or doctrines that we are comfortable viewing the world through. Thanks for all your research and humility that is noticeable in your presentations. I know your video was 2 years ago. You may have already done a deeper dive into this research and come to your own conclusions. But if you are interested in some of the materials and books I found to be the most illuminating, I can make some recommendations. So I'm not sharing the name just because I'm not sure if he is comfortable coming out with his name. So I'm just going to err on the side of caution. But yeah, this is something that I have been pondering. And I know that I made a video specifically saying that I don't. At one point, I was really subscribing to the idea that at least the whole age of Tartaria and everything was the 1,000-year reign. And that's not really what this particular video was about, but it is about the possibility that the book of Revelation has already happened. And I know that people will look at me with things that are happening in the world right now, and they'll say, how can you think that? And I just want you to remember that history is cyclical. And the book of Ecclesiastes tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. I do want to go to a very interesting article that I actually did share here on another video. And I'll link that video at the end of this video. But there are actually reports that Jesus was literally seen in the clouds in AD 66. So let's just read this here and see if you find it as interesting as I do. The following may seem unbelievable, however, all information below is taken from unbiased historical records and is easily verifiable. Sources are also listed at the bottom of the page, and I will leave a link to this article in the description box. Preterism and the Parousia. You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. In Mark 14:61 and 62 and John 21:22 and 23, Jesus declares that the high priest Caiaphas and the apostle John will live to see the second coming. In Mark 14:61 and 62, Jesus declares that the high priest who delivered him over to the Romans for execution will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Then in John 21:22 to 23, Jesus says that the apostle John will remain alive until his return. Jesus also promised to return within his generation in Matthew 16:27 to 28, Matthew 24, and Mark 8:38 to 9:1. Because of statements like these, the disciples all believed that Jesus would return within many of their lifetimes. So as I was pointing out to you, he seemed to be speaking specifically to those he was conversing with, the ones, his disciples, those who had come up to him and asked him these questions. Preterist view of the Parousia. You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. The second coming is described in Revelation 19:11-14. Here Jesus leads an army of angels in the sky. The second coming is described in detail in Revelation 19:11-14. Here Jesus rides a white horse leading an army of angels on horseback on the clouds. There's an artistic depiction of that. A preterist view of the second coming. You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. The second coming is recorded in Roman history. An eerily similar event is recorded to have occurred in Iyar of AD 66 at the start of the worst war in Israel's history, Israel's war with Rome. On the 21st day of the month of Artemisius, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sun setting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. And here's another depiction of the army in the clouds in AD 66. The first Jewish historian, Josephus, describes a heavenly army in the clouds, much like the army Jesus leads in Revelation 19:11-14. This event is also recorded by other historians. The first century pagan historian Tacitus also mentions this event. In the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict of glittering armor. Pseudo-Hegesippus, I probably said that wrong, also describes the coming of Christ on the clouds with his mighty angels. At that time when he writes, a certain figure appeared of tremendous size, which many saw, just as the books of the Jews have disclosed. And before the setting of the sun, there were suddenly seen in the clouds, chariots in the clouds, and armed battle arrays, by which the cities of all, I'm thinking that might be Judea, and its territories were invaded. I just want to point out right here that this, what I've been reading so far, reminds me of this depiction that I found actually while watching the autodidactic channel. I don't remember which video it was that he spoke about it in, but I did go over this in my video of Jesus being seen in the clouds. And this was actually drawn in 1573. So obviously not AD 66, AD 66. But let's just remember that our timeline is probably very manipulated. So some things that we think as being pretty far in the past may be much closer than what we think. I just want to point that out. But I do find it very interesting that right here we have a picture from 1573 of what certainly seems to be a soldier in the clouds. The medieval Jewish historian Sefer Yosephan expounds upon this angelic army in the sky of AD 66 by saying, moreover, in those days were seen chariots of fire and horsemen, a great force flying across the sky near to the ground, coming against Jerusalem and all the land of Judah, all of them horses of fire and riders of fire. The parallels between these three accounts and Revelation 19 are striking. However, in Yosephan's account, one can see how 2 Thessalonians 1:7 was explicitly and literally fulfilled in AD 66. This will happen when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven in blazing fire with his powerful angels. And it does say here, Yosephan adds the fact that this angelic army in the sky of AD 66 was composed of cavalry that blazed with fire, literally fulfilling 2 Thessalonians 1:7. A realized eschatological view of the second coming, the coming of the Lord described. Yosephan's description of the angelic army of fire in the sky in AD 66 fulfills descriptions of the coming of the Lord in Isaiah 66:15, Psalm 68:17, and Habakkuk 3:1-8 in a surprisingly literal way. The coming of Christ in the presence of fiery angels riding horses and chariots, recorded in AD 66 and predicted in 2 Thessalonians, mirrors the coming of the Lord in Isaiah 66:15 in a surprisingly literal way. For behold, the Lord will come in fire, and his chariots like the whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. Descriptions of the coming of the Lord in judgment in Psalm 68:17 and Habakkuk 3:1-8 are also described in a similar fashion. Interestingly, the fiery army of angelic horsemen and charioteers of AD 66 was not the first time a specter like this was recorded in Israel. And I probably won't read the entire thing. I will leave a link in the description box. I'm hoping that you're understanding, though. The point that I'm trying to make is that we do have several accounts of Jesus being seen in the clouds with chariots of fire, with horses. And this is not some futuristic event. This is something that happened in AD 66, which would have been basically in the same generation that Jesus did speak these things, these words to the disciples. So now I'm going to go on to the second email. And I do want to say that I know that I've been kind of telling you in the community chat that I was going to share about the giant articles. But once I saw these two emails in my inbox and kind of saw how they're linked together, I decided to take a different route. So I will definitely go over those giant articles in the future. But at this point in time, I thought that these two kind of meshed better together. But let's read this now. Interesting, I mentioned in a comment in one of your videos that this reads like during the 1,000 years. Thanks for all you do. And so if you actually look, this is coming from the complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English, okay? And let's read this. The torrents of Belial shall break into Abaddon, and the deeps of the abyss shall groan amid the roar of heaving mud. Immediately, my thoughts are mudflood. The land shall cry out because of the calamity fallen upon the world, and all its deeps shall howl, and all those upon it shall rave, and shall perish amid the great misfortune. For God shall sound his mighty voice, and his holy abode shall thunder with the truth of his glory. The heavenly hosts shall cry out, and the world's foundations shall stagger and sway. To me, I'm thinking earthquake. And what's one thing that I've been saying possibly could have caused a mud flood, a worldwide mud flood, and so I'm thinking a worldwide earthquake because of the soil liquefaction. That's just one guess that I have, one hypothesis. I know there are so many other things that it could be. I know a lot of people say plasma, but at this point in time, this sounds to me like an earthquake. The war of the heavenly warriors shall scourge the earth, and it shall not end before the appointed destruction, which shall be forever and without compare. So let's take a look at some of these mud flood photos. Here's one. I believe this one is in Sardis. I'm not able to speak well today, but I do want to say that another thing that I have talked about in several of my videos in which I spoke about mud floods is that I have already made the guess at one point that possibly when Satan was released for after the 1,000 years were up, that it could have caused an earthquake, and that could have caused all of this mud flood destruction. But I'm also thinking that if Jesus, in fact, did come back in around AD 66, again, your guess is as good as mine about our real timeline, but that certainly would have also caused much destruction and much upheaval. So I do think that this is related, though, in some way to Jesus's return. So all this time, we are looking at these photos of mud flood and seeing in real life these mud flood buildings. But Are we looking at it with the proper perspective? A lot of times we're even thinking that this could have possibly been from the biblical flood, which I think that some of it could have been. But again, I'm thinking that some of these more recent mud flooded buildings, possibly reset, may have been from possibly the return of Christ. And I know a lot of people will say, well, if Jesus already came back, we would know that. That is something that we would definitely know. Would we though? Would we really? We have to look at the Vatican with all of its archives that are not allowed to be seen by anyone. We will look at the Smithsonian and their constant cover-up of history. I mean, they convinced almost the entire world that we landed a man on the moon in the 1960s with technology that was more primitive than our cell phones of today. We convinced them of that. There have been so many things that have happened that could have definitely covered this up. Think about it. We have orphan trains. We have the lunatic asylums. We have the 1890 census record fire. And then shortly after that, all of the immigration records burned in Ellis Island, completely lost there. There was also a fire around the same time of the U.S. Patent Office. So all of the patents were burned in a fire. So we don't even know what was invented when, at least if it was filed in those records that were burned. This is something that continuously has happened. And I've done videos on these lunatic asylums before. Why was there such a large need for these lunatic asylums in the 19th century? Many of the areas where they have these gigantic, beautiful buildings that were supposedly built specifically to house the lunatics are in areas where they're not even highly populated. But for some reason, they must have an inordinate amount of insane people. It doesn't add up. And then on top of that, I'm going to mention it again, we've got the orphan trains, which a lot of people have, I keep saying guessed, but I'm going to say it again, have surmised that the children on the orphan trains could have been taken from those who were placed in the lunatic asylums. And the question is, could these lunatic asylums have actually been used for those who were trying to tell others that Christ had already returned? And then on top of that, you can't tell me that these were built specifically for lunatics. We know that many of the buildings that they claim to have been built in the 19th century probably were not. And a lot of these buildings were likely already here when this new population moved in to this area. But this is worldwide. And this doesn't even compare with the buildings that we see in other parts of the world. But this just goes to show that you would have to be very naive to believe that nothing like that would be able to be covered up, because every single one of our governments is shrouded in secrecy and thrives on it. And they've honed that skill of secrecy as best as they possibly could. And they have fooled the population about so many things. What's one more? That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.